Damian, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. Where are you phoning in from?
Thanks. I'm joining you today from the coast of Maine, the snowy coast of Maine. I'm just north of Boston, where I'm a research professor at Boston College's Lynch School of Education and Human Development.
Fantastic. I hear Maine have pretty good lobsters. Is that right?
That is true. That's one of our main exports, that and educational research, I think, are the
Fantastic.
exports.
Damian, quite possibly the most important question for our conversation. What's your coffee order for when I can pop over to Maine?
Man, I like a good green tea myself, chai. I really enjoy having caffeinated beverages when I'm traveling, particularly when I'm traveling in Asia and those cultures. I find that when I'm home and working at the office, my team prefers I not caffeinated. I have enough to say, enough ideas. So when I'm, doing that jet lag and over on your side of the world,
Mm,
I certainly enjoy a good green tea with maybe a touch of dairy in there if it's possible,
love
and
it.
that
Fantastic.
that'll keep me buzzing for the whole day.
Great. And a book that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life. It could be within your area of expertise or it could be more broadly.
Wow, that's a great question, and I wasn't expecting that. I think I'll use this as a chance to talk about and bridge the subject area a little bit because it's something that is both personal and professional for me. But it's the book Mindstorms by
Mm,
Seymour Papert, and it was written in the year 1980, and Seymour was in the middle or even toward the end of his first wave of his career. But for those of your listeners who might be unfamiliar, Seymour Papert was a mathematician from South Africa, born in, I believe, the 19 late mid 30s, actually late 1920s, and was Piaget's researcher in Switzerland studying in the 90s and 60s how children think, literally, like the first really
gosh.
serious research around like how the brain processes and how kids have these developmental stages and neuron, like the brain is developing and certain cognitive abilities become apparent and memory becomes strong enough that the science of learning was literally born as far
Gosh.
as
Wow.
Western understanding. And we all know, or many of us probably remember Piaget from college or maybe graduate school and those famous experiments of small cylinders and wide cylinders and children at certain ages just not having the cognitive bandwidth or having the ability level to conceptually understand those kinds of differences. And then kids reaching certain maturation points and then being ready. So what that did, right? And so I know this is like such a long answer to
This is
such a
great.
simple question, but it really kind of prefaces what I think we're going to talk about for our time together
Mm,
is that what Seymour realized is that like these are the components of how an organism acquires knowledge and learns. And so after finishing his tenure with Piaget in Switzerland, he came over to the United States to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, college just across the river, and he founded two research centers that are
gosh.
still very much present today. And the first was the MIT Media Lab, which became like
Wow.
just a playground for all of these thinkers who were really serious about how these new technologies, particularly computers, could change the way we thought of learning and education, either
Wow.
within education in schools or just one-on-one with individuals, and just how we can start to learn
Wow.
without having a teacher in the room or without having a book even, but using computational opportunities. And he ended up creating the first programming language for children called Logo. The second research lab he founded, which comes full circle, is the Center for Artificial Intelligence.
Wow.
So the idea of understanding how an organism can learn gave birth to this whole idea of computational thought, artificial intelligence. And it all comes back to thinking about like the very foundation of teaching a child and being able to offer a child the right resources at the right time to be able to learn something. And that's like the magic of the universe. If you kind of like look at it like Seymour would, or like a physicist would, that's what
Gosh.
makes it so powerful. So Mindstorms in 1980 put forward that like a child connected to with the power of a computer could change like our whole mind, the whole mindset, literally, and consciousness around what we can teach when and how we might teach it. And he introduces so many crazy ideas and so many powerful ideas that researchers have spent decades and decades just like unpacking them and doing dissertations and writing more books and taking that theory into the field. And he would come up with ideas like, well, what makes someone French? Like every baby who is born in France inherently learns to be French perfectly. They might have learning disabilities which keep them from mathematical computation. They might have trouble with certain language constructs, but almost everyone born in France learns to speak French completely fluently. They understand the culture of being French. It's amazing. And he posits then, if we take ideas like that and think about like, well, what would Mathland look like? Because he's a
Mm.
mathematician. And
Amazing.
he's inherently interested in like math as a way of solving and teaching and, knowledge gain. And he said, imagine if we like had a culture, instead of being French, it was like engrossed in mathematical ideas and principles. And kids were just raised in like in a place where it's gears and ratios. And we talk about math and
Fascinating.
math is like, and he's like, we would inherently think about, like, we wouldn't ever think about teaching math. It would just be something we would, when we were ready, we would learn those concepts of the culture and be able to express it in a natural way. And
Wow.
so your question sets up basically like my entire career has been one of those people like following some of those ideas. And unlike mostly is I think teachers and school leaders and educational technology people and, have run with those practices and those ideas from the book. But I was really lucky that I met Seymour very early in my career, and he was giving a talk, and I'm like pretty, I'm an educational researcher, and my background is like measurement, statistics, and data. And so I really wasn't that familiar, or honestly, like had the capacity to understand a lot of what he was positioning. My questions were like, well, how would you measure the impact of those kinds of ideas and programs? If you were to give a kid a computer and provide this opportunity, what would the impact be? And as a scientist, could we show that through research and demonstrate this? And
Amazing.
so
How
my
fascinating.
career, yeah, so my career has basically been, I can joke with you and anyone listening, but there's an American film called Forrest Gump.
I know that well.
And it's about this character. I think most people know about this, and played by Tom Hanks. And it's a character who's pretty simple, okay, and doesn't have a lot of really complex cognitive worries or thoughts. But he tends to show up at the right place and time and ask a profoundly simple question, typically. And I joke that I'm kind of the Forrest Gump of educational research, and that I've been very lucky to be at the right places at the right
Mm.
time, like getting to meet Seymour and work with him, or getting to be in these, opportunities where people are doing really important work in education. And I'm kind of the guy in the back of the room that at the end raises his hand and says, well, how would we know if it's working? And
Mm.
everyone turns around and looks and says, that's a profound question. Let's design a research study. Let's do that. And so that's what I get excited about, is
Wow.
trying to tell the stories that support the innovations and then use data to like keep the work that people like you,
That's incredible.
leaders are all kind of doing. So I'm a data
That's
geek, I'm a scientist, and that's the perspective that I bring to it.
that is incredible, Damien, and it's so refreshing to hear you talk about that and talk about the encounter with Seymour. It sounds wonderful. What would you say would be some of those kind of guiding questions or threads that you would find if you look back on your career? Yeah, it's a
Place.
great
You really
question.
think this is going to be better than what we were doing before?
Yeah,
And to rewind and like on a personal level, I didn't feel, I mean, and I don't think the school system, I think we were uh, aligned in this viewpoint that I did not do well in the traditional K-12 school. If I wasn't like a good student, I didn't
interesting.
do well in school. I was a troublemaker. I was, so I didn't feel like the educational system was like that great. Like many, when I got to graduate school, I was surrounded by a lot of people who really felt like education was like a really personally wonderful experience for them.
Not
Share
me.
that. It took me a long time to find that and to be able to go to visit amazing schools and sit in classrooms and see that. But I wasn't a firsthand product until for a long time. And so I was kind of, I think it's generally just questioning, like, is this serving kids? How is this serving kids? And I think it started almost with like a punk rock, like, oh yeah, this policymaker has this new thing they're going to roll out that's going to fix our long-term educational problems, and just kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, just like a punk kid might. And then as I've gotten older and more mature, I think it's really turned into like, well, how are we as a global community or as a local community determining what success is and coming to some conclusion about our collective investments in children and schools and education and the pedagogies we use. And for me, just my age and where I was at the time, at Boston College, I was studying, statistics, research design, and it's kind of an old-fashioned field. Like I joke that the state of the art in educational testing is a scanning machine and a number two pencil. And it's kind of the truth. I mean, that was invented in 1937, this idea that we could have one right answer, four wrong answers on a number on a bubble sheet with a number two pencil, and we could create any kind of question and be able to show student growth or success.
Mm.
And we've kind of run with that technology to the point where even today, kids are kind of just taking replications of those same questions on, $1,000 computers and connected to crazy servers and internets that can do the most dynamic
Yeah.
assessments imaginable. So I brought that kind of level of, I want to say dissatisfaction, but just like we could be doing better than this. Like, how can we advance the state of the art to how we collect data and how
Mm.
we analyze data and how we show success
I love
and
that.
communicate that? And no one really cares about that, in and of itself. That's a really small niche field, like advancing the state of the art in data collection. And I personally, went from sharpening number two pencils and sending them in the mail with bubble sheets and stamps to get them back, 2 months later, to inventing with our team at Boston College, Tom Hoffman and Mike Russell, the first like online surveys because we were just like, there has to be a better way. And we heard of these new schools coming online where teachers had computers in their classroom and access to the internet. And we're like, well, why on earth would we be sending them stuff in the mail anymore? If we can get to them through an internet connection, we can create an online survey. And so I got very interested in like this pushing the state of the art in how we collect, analyze, and share data. And I'm still doing that. Like I'm still
Mm.
creating and working on data dashboards for capturing learning with teachers and students. And it's amazing and it's really fun. But what we realized is that we had to kind of position it within an academic framework that people cared about. And at
Mm.
the same time, we're asking these questions and pushing technology for research purposes. Classrooms are being inspired by Seymour Papert. The cost of devices for students is coming down to a point where classrooms and kids are starting to get real connectivity. Late 90s, early 2000s. And we're perfectly positioned with a whole new generation of research tools to be able to really efficiently help them document that first generation of one-to-one computing in
Gosh.
middle schools and high schools. And so, like, the guy who knows nothing about pedagogy and teaching and learning, who was not a good student, finds himself like designing and conducting these studies
Mm.
because I'm kind of geeking out about these cool surveys we're developing, but we have to set them up somewhere to make them a value. So we'll work with companies like Apple and, Microsoft or, and with school districts and governments to get access to the schools. And it became like a real win-win because we're providing them the kinds of information they need to support their programs. And we start publishing research about the impacts of these, investments. But we're also this entire time kind of in still doing so, advancing that state of the art. So my career has basically been at
Gosh.
Boston College since the late 90s, getting that kind of inspiration and then having the direct opportunity to try to apply it
Yeah.
in classrooms all over the world. So feel really very lucky
Wow.
to have gotten a second chance from education in the global school system. And because now part of my job is getting to work with some of the most amazing school leaders and far-reaching educators and help them measure and test their best ideas. So it's pretty fun, and I've finally started to like school and come around to this. So
That's really wonderful. And when you think about the trajectory of your career going from physical mail-in surveys to the use of AI and these incredible, there's access
yeah.
to data and data sets. I mean, you must just look back and go, the change that I've seen in my career has just been astounding.
It's fun, and what it's allowed us to do in my career is democratize the resources. When
Mm,
we started, if you were a principal or a teacher and you called us, and no matter how nice you were, it was just like programming, like lots and lots of programming and Fortran to get, the scantrons to read the data and, then the analysis. And today, like someone can call us and we're like, do you have a Google account? Or what interface are you using? Okay, like here's some survey questions you can ask your students. Here's a drawing prompt. Have your
mm.
kids draw a picture. And here's the tools that you can unpack the results with. And so what we've been able to do, and what I'm really proud of, and this really connects to the academic and social mission of a place like Boston College in the United States, is that we're able to democratize as surveys become essentially free. Like anyone can get an account, and at least if you're a teacher and you want to survey your students about their homework practices or the resources they have available at home, any teacher can basically figure that out and do that today and get that information in a format that they can understand and use and make action with. And that's the piece that is really exciting, that we've been able to make the technology create something that was pretty inaccessible and like pretty ivory tower. Like if your school was rich, if you were in a community that had these resources, you might get this kind of information about your
Mm.
school or your program. But today, it's really just the will and the opportunity and time to invest.
I
So
love
it's pretty
that. I know this is quite a broad question, Damien, but from your research, what do you think separates schools that are using technology well to improve learning from those where it becomes a distraction? Because there is now just there's so much conversation around this in schools, especially in Australia. So what have you noticed, and how do we do a better job?
I mean, honestly, it's about time there's conversation. I mean, we've been using these devices personally and in our classrooms, maybe not critically enough in some ways. And I think one of the challenges that we face as classroom teachers and school leaders and researchers are the very devices that are these powerful computational tools for teaching and learning
Yeah,
are often the exact same device that's used in a restaurant by the mom or dad to get the kid to completely check out and be passive and quiet down.
it's interesting.
And so I think as educators, we haven't done a good enough job really differentiating what is educational technology about and why are we doing it and what is its value and are we finding evidence that we're getting closer to that. And I
Yeah,
think we've
wow.
had a generation of educational technology. And I think for those that have made the investment in those questions, they tend to have their other components well
Hmm.
sorted. I'll talk about those to really answer your question
Yeah,
when I,
wow.
but the idea is that you have, most people don't reflect. I mean, most systems don't actively stop and say, are we any closer? Is teaching and learning better this year than it was last year because we have iPads for our grade fives? And so, what makes a program successful or not to me tends, and this is not just me getting lucky enough to visit a lot of these schools and programs, but actually doing a lot of research, conducting a lot of data. We collected over 1,000 classroom teacher surveys this week, 21 different countries. So like I live in data and I, when I'm talking, I'm really trying to represent the voices of the teachers and students that we've been able to work with in these programs. And what we find is one-to-one student access seems to be pretty critical for transformational school-wide learning experiences.
Right.
And that just doesn't happen because of the device, but the device at that ratio tends to be a necessary condition. When we go back to the model of five machines in the back of the room, it takes an extra creative teacher and system to be able to create an equity of experience.
Right.
So I I think there's the access piece is important, but it's not, like you can be successful without it, but it really helps to have a one-to-one student ratio.
Interesting.
The second is leadership. Obviously, school leaders can make a real difference in creating a program or school-wide program. Now, you can have pockets of innovation. You can have amazing teachers that kind of just go rogue and figure it out and do amazing things. What happens is these tend in many settings to kind of stay pockets. And so you have two children. One might just randomly go through the system and have those experiences while their brother or sister is in the other team or doesn't have
Wow.
that teacher and has a totally different experience. So from a school equity point of view, leadership makes a difference in sort of creating a situation where everyone in the school is getting the benefit of those tools. And then I think mission and vision, like knowing why we're doing it and to be able to articulate, like we're doing this to create equity of access, we're doing this to raise test scores, we're doing this to create more engaged kids because they're like squirmy too much of the time. And so we need to use more media to keep them engaged in our curriculum, whatever that might be, defining that. And
Mm.
then I would be, professional learning is obviously really important. There's an idea that like devices come down and they hit the students' desks and teaching and learning is transformed. It
Mm.
all comes down to the teacher. The teacher is the most important variable and like statistical component in every model of educational technology programs. Teachers do what they think is best for their kids in the moment, and that may or may not use technology. Find those teachers that feel well supported and have a program with a vision and a mission. They've been given professional learning and they have easy access, can create an environment where the tool is secondary to the teaching and learning.
Wow.
And then the very last piece, well, the second to the last piece is that equity and access, because we have to recognize too that the technology in our research is almost always the vehicle for differentiation.
Right.
It's almost always. So when we take the technology away, it becomes really hard for teachers to create accessible resources that still hit at all the right levels. And I'm not just talking about like differentiating for our like high cognitive kids to our strugglers, but we're talking about, many of our teachers are serving kids of many native languages or with real learning disabilities or trauma or real
Mm.
emotional and social and physical challenges that
Yeah.
technology provides some equity of experience for. And then, like the, researcher that I am, the very final component is an opportunity for reflection and an opportunity to step back and say, are we in a place where we think are we achieving our mission and our vision? Do we have
Mm.
evidence of that? And sometimes what's really amazing is settings that are so profoundly successful that that question is just like a laughing matter at the end. They're just like, oh my gosh, look around. Like, we don't need a researcher. We don't need a study. Just look at the students' work. Talk to the students. Anyone that walks into our building will see what we've done here.
Yeah.
And we can rest our laurels on that. More often than not, that's complemented by saying, let's show some evidence that helps us not only show our summative success, but allow us to have some formative opportunity for reflection and continued growth.
Yeah. Gosh, Damien, I feel like there are podcast episodes in each of those points that you've
Oh
raised,
man, I'm afraid there is.
which is really wonderful. I mean, what are some of the examples of schools that you've worked with or districts that you are most proud of? What are some sectors that you go, this is what we're talking about. This is a great example.
Yes, so let me take a word from our sponsors here. I'd like to shout out to the following schools. No, in all seriousness, it's often something that is profoundly simple
Mm.
and universal. I mean, we've all been to schools that have lots of resources and high tuition, and they can kind of fix things with resources and money and amazing connections and kids that go home to really successful families and, big dinners and those are easy to kind of find great stories, and you can walk away feeling really good about education and what we're doing as teachers and schools. But the examples that I really think of are the ones that have been so simple, yet they've created like a
Mm.
pivot in the culture.
Amazing.
And one example is this came out originally. I heard about this project in India at a school in Mumbai where a teacher had morning meeting every day with his primary students, maybe age 7 or 8, 9. And they had like 30, 35 kids in the classroom. It was a private school. And they all had a device. I think it was an iPad, really first gen iPad probably. And in the morning meeting, he'd ask them a couple reflection questions and they write the answer on their iPad. And then that turned into like a little survey game or a little prompt. And he started collecting the data. And one of the parents happened to be like a world-class data visualization expert. And his kid like came home. It's like every day I take a survey and morning meeting about like these 4 or 5 questions my teacher asked me every day. And they like got talking and he's like, could I see the data? And he shares the data with this guy, Sujoy Chidhari, a parent at the school. And he creates this beautiful data dashboard.
Wow.
And it shows like the whole class over the whole school year. And it shows one of the questions is, what did you have for breakfast? And it visualizes all of the students' responses. And it was like boys and girls. And you could see the
That's
differences.
so cool.
And on Mondays, what was breakfast like compared to Fridays? How do you feel about learning today? It was like
Hmm.
like 5 or 6 simple questions. And the kids did this survey in a minute during morning meeting just to kind of like basically ground them and just kind of get them ready for the school day. And so we replicated it. I took it to public schools in the United States in Michigan, a place called Muskegon near Detroit, where they like build cars, very kind of industrial, not a place with a thought of a lot of resources. And we started doing it like across entire schools because these kids had they had like a Chromebook, some had iPads, they had rudimentary devices that they were using in school a bit. And I'm like, well, let's try it. And we collected everything on a server. And I got the guy from India to help us with the data visualization dashboards. He helped train our team, and we did it ourselves. And we created this thing. And it asked the kids again about breakfast. And the data collected from our first through third graders over like 7 months in the school
Amazing.
was so powerful about the connection between not eating breakfast and not feeling good
Wow.
and angry and just stressed out that the school board found money to provide a mandatory breakfast program across the
Isn't that
school.
amazing?
And it was like literally like little kids with iPads just saying like, "Oh, I had French toast today. Oh, I had cereal. I didn't have anything. How do you feel? I'm kind of tired. How do you feel? I feel good." And just taking all of that information, it was so powerful. And then the kids and the teachers were able, and then the last insight from this, because it's
Wow.
just, this is about pedagogy now. So
Wow.
the teacher I was working with was the kind of teacher, and he told me this, that he would spend his weekends planning. So
Hmm.
Monday morning was like the big unveil. Like, here's what we're doing this week. I have this great lesson. It's going to involve all these components. You guys are going to love it. We're going to dive in. When he was most ready for the week was Monday morning. He was caffeinated, well rested. He was ready to take on his class and the week. Each day of the week, he just felt a little more tired. That's how it goes sometimes. He assumed his students were the same way.
Wow.
And when he looked at the data from his students by like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, he saw the exact opposite. Monday was a wreck for most kids. Like Monday morning was a difficult transition from wherever they were coming from. For whatever reason, they did not feel ready to learn. They did
Wow.
not feel prepared. By Thursday or Friday, the majority of the kids had like gotten in the program of the school week so that like Thursday and Fridays, there was a much higher proportion of his students saying like, I'm ready to learn. I'm excited. I feel good. I had breakfast this morning. That was we always ask about breakfast. We call it the breakfast survey. And kids love just
We
telling us
we
about their breakfast.
we do the same. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. That Damien, that's so interesting. And I love how
Simple
you've
little things that like
yeah.
anybody could do to support their culture and their problem and bring
Mm,
some data in and some reflection. And even better, if you can empower student voice,
yeah.
you're in for a win.
I have the privilege of working for the New South Wales Department of Education. It is a huge, huge beast, and my school is in quite a diverse and a disadvantaged area. And our breakfast club is one of our favorite things that we do because kids come and regardless of what's happened at home, they get a slice of toast and an apple, and they love it. And we've seen. a huge change in learning. And I love that you sort of took a hunch and you're using data to really drive meaningful change. And it's not complicated, is it? It seems really practical.
That's what I love about it. And, again, in some cases, there are certain stakeholders, especially when you're asking for money for something in a budget, that having data, being able to say this isn't just our hunch, but we were able to follow up on this. And
Mm,
empirically, there is a really high connection, not just globally, but in our very classrooms between kids feeling hungry and tired and
mm.
hungry and angry and
Yeah.
hungry and having disciplinary referrals. If
Yeah.
we can address hunger, that's a win. And that's
That's,
actually a budget win. And they're like, how much is a slice of toast and some apples? Like, we could do this.
yeah.
And so it's empower. We have sometimes in schools we feel like we're not at the center of the world and the center of the attention of our policymakers globally. And it feels like other things get more attention and more money and budgets in the world, which is unfortunate because I think we can agree that education's probably our best investment. But we really do have more, I think, inflection and power within our communities than we realize to
Mm,
define our success and tell our story. And one of the inspiring things I think any school leader, any teacher can do is like look at your school mission. And it's really interesting because we kind of assume that a mission is only like talking about one thing. And there's only kind of one aspect to that mission. But in our research with our friend Steve Stemler at Wesleyan University in the United States, we ended up like looking at a whole lot of different school mission statements, like thousands of them actually. And I don't recommend that actually to
that
anyone.
sounds
It
awful.
was a little, thank
Yeah.
goodness for AI today, but that's
Yeah.
what we use, back when graduate school was tough. But in all seriousness, we were interested in how do schools define and position themselves in these communities? And is there variation that's meaningful? Can we measure those variants as researchers? And so one of the first things we do when we're working with a school or if we're working starting a conversation with a classroom teacher or a school leader is, well, what is your mission saying? What are
Mm,
the components that you are positioning yourself to your community about? And that is a great way to recognize that it's usually multifaceted. Most schools are talking about doing a lot of things. It's not just academics or cognitive. It's not just emotional development. It's not just creating citizens. It's usually some combination of those things. Missions aren't perfect, but they provide a starting point for saying, like, where do we see this in our
yeah.
implementation?
I,
And then as a
yeah.
researcher, where
Wow.
do we see it in our assessment? Where's the evidence then of growth as citizens or
Mm,
having a Jesuit identity if you're a
mm,
Catholic school or whatever that might be? And what we find is that, the mission is often pretty solid and people in their school can access it and even might know it and can talk about it. But then when we get to the implementation, it kind of can be those lines are sometimes clear and they're sometimes not. And so
mm.
sometimes it's very clear how the components of the mission manifest in the classroom and in the budget and in the professional learning and in all of the components of a school. And you can see those through lines. But then when we get to assessment, and how the school ultimately measures their students, what we often see is that I and A become like an acronym for missing in action instead of mission, implementation, assessment. And so there's really this disconnect between how we measure success and communicate success as we work backwards to what are those components in our mission. And so
Yeah.
we have a little bit of, I think, that's a challenge and an opportunity. But, many of us are coming from schools that have very broad, I'll even say like beautiful mission statements that espouse lots of different qualities and characteristics that excite us as educators and parents and things like this. And then we can look at how we spend our money and we have like good teachers and here's how we train them and here's how we try to support them and here are the learning tools and the curriculum and the textbooks and computers and all this stuff, facilities. But then when we get to like measuring the students, it's like, well, we have math scores, we have language arts scores, we have our valedictorian ranked at the top based on their GPA, and we're sending kind of there's a disconnect
Mm,
between those qualities that we kind of share in our assessments when we get back to the mission. So
Gosh.
that's a really fun, opportunity for a creative school leader or for a teacher to think about like, well, what would a successful graduate based on our mission, how would we measure that? How would
Mm.
we rank our students from valedictorian to number, 640 or whatever it is?
Mm.
Um, we do it with academics and cognitive performance all the time. We leave so much on the table that we actually really care about, and we do
Yeah.
ourselves a disservice. And I would argue, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, is part of that is like we had really limited technology to measure success. Number two, pencils. We have bubble sheets. So like showing the social development or the emotional development of someone over 5 or 10 years with a number with your tool being a number two pencil and a scanning sheet, that's a challenge. But I would argue the kinds of tools we have in our schools today, the kinds of opportunities we have to work one-on-one and have children actively reflecting and recording their experiences and sharing them through portfolios, through all kinds of exciting
Yeah.
opportunities with technology. I think there's a big, bright, exciting future out there for
Mm.
schools that want to use more than just test scores, to be honest, as
Yeah.
their touch point for success.
I think there's so much in that, Damien, and I would love to get your thoughts on AI. I know that is a huge question, but considering the changes that you've seen in your career, I mean, what are some of the things that you're noticing, some of the opportunities or some of the challenges with AI in schools now? Once again, a huge question, but I'd love to get your
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah. Well, I told you, I'm kind of an old punk rocker. So the immediate reaction is kind of like an eye roll, right? Like, oh, come on, AI. Like we've
Mm.
always had large language models and research. We've had machine scoring since the 1960s, where a
Right.
computer could look at a student's written essay and score it with a higher degree of reliability than a human. But for a whole lot of reasons, we've not really used a lot of that technology. So we have the silicon, we have the bandwidth now essentially to make these kinds of models do all kinds of crazy things that we don't even
Mm.
know. It's like this is our, the same civilization that has invented a fire but doesn't know how to put out fires, unfortunately. Like we're still struggling in the United States and in Australia and all over the world with uncontrolled wildfires after many generations of trying to be able to tame fire. We're still struggling. So I feel like all technologies represent a little bit of a dragon or something that manifests beyond our imagination and is hard to
Mm.
control. And AI, I think, accelerates that in some ways
Mm.
and
Mm.
brings that to a mainstream concentration,
Yeah.
tipping point, as it were. And I think with that, I think there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gathered, but I want to try to get this quote right, and I can't even remember who I'm quoting, so I guess if I get it wrong, it won't matter. But AI can be amazing for changing the way we model weather, but can it make it rain?
Mm. That's a
Like
great point.
there's still like these physical aspects of our universe that we still need to remember that we have these living, breathing, biological learning entities in front of us in our classrooms every day that have germs and, agendas and so I think it's easy to lose sight of the truly amazing technology that we have in our, like our brains are still by far the most amazing computers and technology we have. And I think too often it's easy to just kind of shrug that off and lose that responsibility and look at technology to help us. But I generally think that as researchers, we're using AI to automate some things that used to take a lot of time, and we can use that to democratize those resources. So what used to cost, $100 for a school now can cost $6 or something like that because we can just, build those programs. But I'm not running scared. We're just completing a survey with 31, 33 different countries. We're talking to over 7,000 classroom teachers about how they're using AI.
Mm.
Fascinating. We're asking them about how they feel about it. We're asking about how their students are using AI. So as a researcher, I'm really, not thinking as much, hopefully, about my predilections and my biases as a, American male researcher here trying to look at the problem, but how are educators around the world and children and students seeing these opportunities? And I'll give you a sneak preview. Lesson planning seems to be the most dominant, most practical global use of AI we've seen from teachers, followed by a little bit in grading, and then some like communication stuff. Like I have to do 85 different messages to parents. I can use AI to help me customize those messages a little bit. And in my own
Damien,
work,
wow,
yeah, we're doing cool stuff too.
that's so
Um,
cool.
so it's exciting, but I'm not sure. It's a big
Yeah.
question. Let's come back to it someday.
That's so
There's
exciting. Damien, that's really interesting. It sounds like you're a bit of an optimist because we hear so much around AI and how it's going to change everything and robots are going to take over our world. But it seems as if there's some really positives from your point of view. Is that correct?
I am an optimist, and I do think there are many things that robots can get their shake at and see how they do. And I'm sure we. Good morning.
Say hi, B. Hey, this is Damien. He's
Uh,
phoning from America. That's a long way away. Hey,
do you know how much snow there is in America? Yeah.
snow. Do we have snow outside of our house? No. How good's that?
So,
That's like where Nana lives. There's snow at the moment.
yeah.
Hey, sweetheart, you go to bed and I'll give you a cuddle in 10 minutes, okay? Okay. I love you. See ya. Bye. That's so funny. She loves snow. We've got relatives over in the, or my mum lives in the UK, and so she is just amazed that other countries would have snow. But Damien, just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I'm so grateful for you taking the time, and it's actually quite surreal to get to speak to you because I've listened to and read so much of your work, and it's so refreshing to hear your passion. And I love how you light up when you talk about useful data in schools. It's really quite wonderful and really quite refreshing. What are some of the things that you are most optimistic about when it comes to how schools effectively use data? What are some of those things that you look forward to and say, my gosh, this is the generation or this is the time that we will see this?
I mean, mentioned, some very simple applications like
Mm,
just empowering students' voices through a simple morning meeting survey. So it's not that we're waiting for the next technology, I think, to save us or to fix everything. I think we have a lot in front of us. I work almost every week with a startup called Hollow Tracker based in Singapore, and they've created it's like the simplest thing. It's a web-based app that teachers typically volunteer to use, and it has all of their students, like like an emoji for each student or their initials in their class. And these are classes, typically we've done a lot of implementation in Singapore, but we've been working in the Ukraine, Romania, and Brazil. And schools put in like their framework
so cool.
or their 6 C's or whatever it is that kind of has, it's like on the wall, but is never present in any of the real conversations about practice. And there's no data about it. And the idea was is like, could we, if we identify these areas and kind of define them, could we measure them and could we help understand the conditions with which students are achieving or not achieving, or the students who struggle with this? Would there be patterns? Could we help individual kids with their own journeys? And could we help teachers see patterns across classes and their own students?
Incredible.
So, like, we tried it with like some behavior indicators in Brazil. It was pretty fun. We used it in studies where we were able to show like the impact of media on kids and their socialization and how they were talking to each other. But my favorite uses have been in these settings that have like one-on-one parent teacher conferences. And this is a school, I'm not gonna identify the school, but they do parent-led conferences. I'm sorry, student-led parent teacher conferences. And teachers serve like 20 or 25 kids. And each one of these conferences takes a tremendous amount of preparation for the
Mm,
student and for the teacher to kind of be ready. It's a high touch moment when the parent comes in. This is a school that's kind of, it has a high tuition. Parents have very high expectations for excellence. And they're pushing beyond just like, here's your test score, here's your spelling, here's your math. They're trying to talk about the whole child. They're trying to acknowledge the
wow.
complexity of their whole mission. And so what they did is they put those components of their mission into the web-based app. And so when Matthew, demonstrates compassion or fails to demonstrate compassion, it can be a positive or a negative. The teacher, either in real time or when they get a moment, pulls out the app and makes like a 3-second little boom, like your emoji, some degree. They can put a note if they
Fantastic.
want. and it does a time date stamp and it knows who you are and it tracks this. And so at the end of like a quarter or a term, the teacher pulls up all of, all the tracks that have been created. And it's like, oh, wow, Mondays are really tough for Matthew.
Wow.
Almost all the times that you're having like a negative situation, it's early in the week or it's right before lunch. Or can we use that information to help shine a light on you through these patterns? Or can we show your growth? Like, wow, look, like Matthew's really making a difference. Here's 5 examples of compassion on every day of the week. It's
Mm.
amazing. And when the parents would come in, so I asked the school, I said, well, how do we? I love the technology. I think it's really cool. I like how it's connecting to your mission. But as a researcher, I want to measure if this is better or if this is an improvement or some indication. And the teachers were they're very practical. They're like, well, I want to measure if it's taking me more time to have these 25 parent teacher conferences because it takes me like a month of planning. It's killing our Septembers. And like we do this 3 times a year. It's like way too much work. And so we fed things into an AI tool that was totally secure and not connected to the wider world, out even, with students de-identified. And we asked it to create kind of reports. And then we said, well, do it like Dr. Seuss. Do it like, do it as a poem. Do it in Portuguese for this family that doesn't speak English.
Amazing.
Then the teacher went in and edited it and did some other things and added some examples of student work. But we were able to decrease the amount of time that teachers spent doing meaningful, like doing like low level work and put their time in better practice, basically, like actually
Wow.
doing the reflection and like using the data. So I think things like AI and like technologies, that's like a pretty simple app. Like, I mean, it actually works really well. It has a lot of security functions. I don't want to undersell HoloTracker. It's amazing. But the simple tools that allow us to just reflect and check our assumptions can create cultures that make huge differences.
I love that.
And that's, I think, what I'm optimistic about. And we can let AI sift through thousands and thousands of students' responses and when they're logging into the homework app and when they're logging out and tracking that kind of information. So when the school leadership and the parents and the board all sit down and they want to ask deep questions about the community and learning, like, do our student athletes struggle with homework completion more than our non-student athletes during the game season versus non-game season? Or,
Amazing.
students who have been in our school 2 years or less react differently to our initiatives than kids that have been here since kindergarten or whatever that, like, we have the ability to have that information instantly for leadership and teachers.
That's
We
incredible.
need to build a culture and we need to build an alliance and some collective understanding about what we want to measure now. So the technology has caught up to us. We're not just using bubble sheets and number two pencils anymore. Maybe we are a little bit, but we can move beyond that. And this next generation is going to move beyond that, I trust and I
Wow.
hope.
Wow.
And I am optimistic. And the first conversation, when I raised my hand, when I heard Seymour Papert speak for the very first time, I said, this is all very interesting and providing kids one-to-one computers and changing the opportunities for whole cognition and society is very cool. I like it. However, what if test scores don't go up in the first 3 years and our policymakers say, oh, this isn't working, and they try to throw out the program? And he
Wow.
laughed and he goes, well, I hope by the time we're there that our policymakers will be much more enlightened than they are now.
Wow.
And I often think how long it's taken us. And that conversation was over 20 years ago, at least now. And
Gosh.
so we're still struggling. But the people listening to this podcast, the people that you work with, the people you get to interact with, and who have dedicated their lives to education have the right, more than anyone else, as far as I'm concerned, to define what success is in their community and their school. And we have the technology now and the resources and all of the tools just about in place to be able to support those who are ready to take that jump in that journey. And I don't
Gosh.
think it's going to say like we don't need tests anymore and, who needs to measure math competence. But the honest truth is that AI can outperform any student on any traditional math or language arts assessment at this point.
Wow.
PISA has been mastered by ChatGPT. Like Singapore used to be our top achieving, like math and language arts country. When we look at international assessments, they're now ranked below an AI engine who could just take the same assessment and outperform almost any student.
Gosh.
So that provides the opportunity for us to
Oh,
think
wow.
about what can we do that computers can't. What are the inherently human learning opportunities and things that
Incredible.
we can free up. So it's a very exciting time. And I think it's a really optimistic time in many, many ways. But it's easy for us to lose sight that we are at the driver's seat here
Hmm.
and we actually can measure what matters. We can tell the stories that we think make a difference. And I think our communities and our policymakers will respond if we do it right and we are earnest and we have evidence that matches the quality of evidence that's being used to make decisions today is not that high of a
Gosh.
bar. So I think
Gosh.
we can really do this together. And I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. And I appreciate what you're doing to
Thank you.
bring ideas and people together. Because I'm just a lone academic researcher with a lot of Excel files and data files just trying to tell stories. So it's really the classroom teachers and school leaders
Incredible.
and policymakers that can drive this. So
Damien, I'm so grateful for you taking the time to talk to me today. I have been a huge fan of your work for a really long time, and it's kind of surreal getting to have a conversation with somebody whose voice is quite familiar. Like I've seen interviews that you've done and so many things, and I'm incredibly grateful, like I said, that you would jump on a call and speak with me. And thank you for your passion and your excitement and your commitment to our wonderful profession. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for having a conversation with me today. Thank you so much.
appreciate that. Thank you, Matthew, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.